Good morning. It's still morning. I'm going to be here. I'm Ann Bagley, and I bring to you a presentation this morning that was actually rolled out at the National Conference of the American Planning Association in April. So you're the second to see it. If you were at the National Planning Conference, take a nap. It's the same thing. So we're looking forward to looking at ethics and considerations for what you need to do your job, and Dave just told you what you've got to do. So we looked at what ethics are, and ethics are a little different from morals. Morals are a judgment basically on whether something's good or bad. I'm sure you all have excellent morals, so I'm not having a problem with that. But ethics are based on a code of conduct that are a system of rules and standards that you have. The American Planning Association has 2 of those, and most of your cities have an ethical code that you have to abide by. So we're going to look today basically at what ethics are, like that. It's a principle of governing that you can rely on to touch base on when you have to make a decision or an action as a planning commissioner or a staff. So there are a variety of them. Like the main one I'll be talking about today is the American Planning Association's Ethical Principles in Planning. You have state guidelines. You have the AICP Code of Ethics. A lot of times you'll hear people throw the AICP Code. Okay, Ethical Principles in Planning of the American Planning Association. Some of you, and some staff members and your planning professionals in your city, maybe AICP, which is the American Institute of Certified Planners, tests we take, and continuing education credits. But your standards for ethical principles are your own moral compass in looking at what's good and bad, but how you apply those rules that are set forward for you. So we're going to look at that. So usually most of your local ethics ordinances look at what's prohibited conduct for you, the thou shalt nots, of solicitation of gifts or misuse of your position, or mainly the main conflicts of interest that people have are financial, how you discuss things out in and outside of your meetings, outside, calling it ex parte discussion, serial meetings, which we'll talk about, and the Open Meetings Act. So disclosures, if you have a conflict of interest or if you've done any of those things, you need to disclose it, and your city will have some sort of form that you need to have. And we'll look at that as well. So, as I talked about earlier, tried to talk about earlier, whether you heard me or not, the American Planning Association has a whole section called Ethical Principles in Planning. And you can find it on the APA website, which is planning.org. And it really looks at 2 parts of an ethical behavior for you. That the planning process must continuously pursue and faithfully serve the public interest. That's one. And the second one is that the planning process participants, that's all of you, continuously to strive to achieve high standards of integrity and proficiency so that public respect for the planning process is maintained. We have enough difficulties working in cities to get that respect that's deserved. First one, that must continuously pursue and faithfully serve the public interest. Okay, who's the public? Everybody's the public. Your neighbor's the public. You're the public. Your electors are the public. You're everybody, basically. And their interest really that you're trying to serve as a planning commissioner or a board of adjustment or staff is that people want a place to live that's safe and attractive and happy. I like that word now. I'm throwing in happy a lot now. But they can live and get around in and feel comfortable. But what happens is you have conflicting interests sometimes. This person wants a large lot, big house on a large lot. This developer or people want to live on smaller lots or tiny houses. So you've got to balance that. A lot of what planning is just a balancing act. But what we have to do, the first one of these parts of this ethical principles in planning is you have to recognize the rights of citizens to participate. And I'm sure you all who sit on these boards or commissions, look at their people that come to your boards and commissions that you basically wish they would sit down and shut up. And maybe one of your fellow commissioners, but they really have that right. The public has the right to be informed and to be listened to as well. What happens a lot of times is when you're trying to deal with the public is you end up in what's called an ex parte discussion. Now, an ex parte discussion can be written or it can be a verbal comment, but it's really outside of the realm of the public hearing. Your discussions, you're hit up in the grocery store to discuss a case that somebody's coming. This happens in smaller cities more than large cities. Problem is that you're not hearing both sides of the case at that point. And I would caution you, I just heard a story of a planning commissioner that was accosted in the grocery store by somebody that had an issue with a case. And he'd been told over and over again, yeah, just listen, you know, don't commit to anything, don't tell them how you're going to vote. And so he stood there and went, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. So, get to the meeting. He votes against it. The neighbor jumps up at the meeting and says, you told me you were going to vote for that. You stood in the grocery store and you went, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. You said yes to my complaint. So you have to really be careful as to how you couch things. You do tell people, I'm listening. You may have to preface it with I'm listening, but we're going to conduct all the business and you need to come to the meeting. Not to be talking outside the meeting. There are, because you really, it's perception again, and a lot of what you do as a commissioner or a board of adjustment member or even a staff member, a lot of it's how you're perceived in doing your job. And you don't want to be susceptible to undue influence. Your neighbor may really have a really good case, but you know, you still, it's worse with family though. But what it is this improper discussion outside of your meeting where you tell somebody how you're going to vote, or you tell somebody, oh yeah, that's a wonderful project, you're leading them on a little. But the problem is that if somebody calls you, not calls you on the phone, but brings it up that you communicated outside the meeting, that could invalidate the business that's handled. Yeah.
So the ex parte is really about expressing your own opinions about a case, not, or is that really? No, it's involving yourself in a discussion. Whether it's your opinion or somebody else's opinion, you're listening. You're part of a conversation. You have to be careful what you say. You want to go into your meeting with an open mind. You want to go in that you haven't made that you give any illusions that you've made a decision or you're in total agreement with somebody. It's care. For me as a I am a former planning commissioner. I was actually on a commission with Jamie. I never would tell anybody how I would vote. I really would say, thank you for bringing me this project. Dallas has a little bit different situation. We were expected as planning commissioners to talk with the developers, to talk with the applicants. What we weren't always encouraged at Dallas, and what I encourage, if you're going to talk, and if your city allows you to talk, you need to talk to both sides. If there's opposition, and it's not talk, you need to listen to both sides. It's what more I'm meaning. Because if somebody comes in and says, well, you talked to him, but you didn't talk to me. You listened to him, but you didn't listen to me. So it's just that I haven't seen many cases, but you can get in trouble, and not just yourself in trouble, but your whole commission in trouble. Okay, part of that ex parte type discussion is a serial meeting. And it could be a series of communications. Now, part of ex parte and part of the serial meeting is not just limited to you talking to somebody face to face. It's email, it's a telephone call, it's even Facebook and social media.
you need to be very careful in all of those because you'll have those things on your computer. And if there is any case that comes to a court case, your computer could be taken out the door by people investigating the case. That includes your cell phone. So the thing is, if you have information, you get it. You need to be sure that you get an email, you need to be sure that you send it directly to staff. Don't try to share it with each other. Get it to a staff person to disseminate the knowledge. And at serial meeting also, you walk out to the car after your meeting, or you're walking into the building, and you keep talking about the case you just talked about. That's a serial meeting. Even though it's over and the decision's been made, you're still having a meeting. But like I said, all your correspondence is subject to legal if there's the discovery, if there's any legal action, and you really, like I said, you need to get the staff. Even it's awkward sometimes. I had a case one time, I don't know if you were in on this one, Janie, it was a nightclub, and they wanted to have late hours and dancing and other things. I got 263 emails. 260 of them all said the same thing because the applicant had gotten me. But what I had to do was go through every one of the emails and see if it was just to me or if it went to the whole commission. So everything really should go, information that's disseminated should come through a staff person. I'm not too sensitive on this. All right. Citizens deserve clear and accurate information. You're talking about if you're talking to a citizen, you need to be sure you got the right information because you have an ethical obligation to be fair to the public. And we get tired sometimes of public participation, but it's more than just satisfying that requirement that you hold a public meeting. It's being, we love the word transparent now. I don't know, it seems like you can just see through it, but you need to be there to look at what is really all the issues. Because I know going into a meeting, over and over again it would happen. I would read my materials, the staff report, I'd read the letter from the applicant, I'd read the letter from the opposition. I'd go and think, well, you know, I think I know, I'm not going to tell anybody, I think I know what I think of this, how I'm going to vote on this project. And I will hear something in that meeting that totally changes my mind. And if I've committed, like, yeah, I like your project, it's wonderful, and then I say, I vote against it, I lose my credibility. And you don't need, if anything, we need to have credible boards. So we look at expanding the opportunity for people to participate. Your decisions, like zoning, as Dave told you, your decisions in zoning a lot of times have to be in accordance, well, they have to be in accordance with the comprehensive plan. You want to listen to that relevant discussion, and you want to be sure that you're including everything you need. We look at including now the affordable housing. We look at including access to amenities. We look at all sorts of things as we look at solutions, particularly when you're dealing with planned development. Well, the one thing you want to do as a commissioner or board of adjustment, you need to be sure that you're using your community's goals. Do you have comprehensive plans? Does anybody not have a comprehensive plan? Okay. Do you use your comprehensive plan? Does the staff give you the information on the comprehensive plan of what section of the plan needs to be looked at? That's good. Is that your staff? No.
Development.
Okay, good. I was just thinking he keeps looking at him. He's going, uh-oh. But you need to be aware of those goals that are set forth, and not just always the land use goals. We had a case of a recycling plant. I name names. I'm sorry, I just name names. Anyway, the land use, all the staff looked at was just land use. But we had transportation issues, we had environmental issues, and even economic development issues. So you need to look at those. You need to be able to explain what's going on to your friends and neighbors. And if you're having trouble explaining, get with staff. And back to these meetings that we were expected to in Dallas to have. I tried to cover myself, but if I had to meet, or developer wanted to meet, and eventually Dallas Planning Commission wanted you to meet with the applicant, I tried to meet at City Hall with the staff member present. It was just covered. Staff member kept me honest, and I heard, just the general discussion. But you need to relate the goals that are in your comprehensive plan to your decision. Is this something that follows the goal? We need more affordable housing. Just all sorts of different goals. Yes, sir.
Well, this is a little bit off topic, but
I'm fine.
it kind of gets to the topic of communications outside of the meeting. So I wanted to get your thoughts on site visits prior to the meeting. A lot of times you'll get a packet, a week in advance, and it'll have the address. And I've been told two different things. A city attorney, when I did zoning in Cincinnati, said, don't go to the site, because if you go to the site, you now have information that the rest of your committee or your commission doesn't have. You have a unique perspective now that doesn't come out. But do you recommend going to site to do the visits, or does it matter which board, whether you're on a ZBA board versus a planning commission? I mean, could you share your thoughts, please?
Personally, I like site visits, but I agree with the attorney that you do, unless everybody goes, you have a different perspective. And he, good old days, thank you, saving me on this one.
So the answer is, it depends.
Yeah.
If you're on the Planning and Zoning Commission, there's not really a big problem with going out to a site. In fact, I kind of like going to a site. If you go to the site, don't talk to anybody. Just drive by.
Go one at a time.
Kind of get your bearings. For those of you on the Zoning Board of Adjustment, it's a different standard. Quasi-judicial body, it's not your responsibility to be collecting facts. You are simply there to evaluate the facts presented to you, and so you should not go to the site if you're on ZBA.
Flats also, subdivision you're not allowed to go to.
That's a different story. It depends.
There's
There's no rule, there's no written rule in the state statute that you can't go out and see a flat site. That's the city of Dallas, and it's the only city I've ever worked in that had that. So I'm just, I used to have a lot of problems with that. I'm a contrarian in a lot of ways, Daniel.
Well, I appreciate that, because I'm coming off of a ZBA board where I kept myself from going on site visits because of that issue, but it sounds like as a planning commissioner now, that might be more encouraged, or...
It's going to depend on how your individual staff and city attorney looks at it, whether they want you. Now in Dallas, we had certain cases where we all got on a bus and we trooped out to the site. And when I worked as a planner and I worked in the city of Sugar Land, I was happy that they would go see it. But I didn't want them talking to each other. But a lot of the sites, if you're in certain communities, they're ones you drive by, you have that knowledge anyway. So you just, it depends. Not on Board of Adjustment, because that is definitely, the judge doesn't go out to the scene of the crime to look at the issue. So it all is going to depend on what your city does. It's a lot of times it's very helpful to see the site. Sometimes on the subdivision plat, you see an empty field. But you also see what's around it. But on a subdivision plat, it shouldn't, what's around it shouldn't influence you really whether you approve a subdivision plat, because you have very strict administrative rules for how you do. Like if the plat meets your requirements of your city, you don't have a whole lot of choice. You don't have any choice, basically. Unless you can find something wrong, but then you have to say what's wrong. Now the planning process we talk about exists really to serve that public interest. And we have to have a process. If we're not doing things by a process, then it's just kind of out there. But it requires that you understand the policies, the goals, and it requires that you try to reach the best possible action you can meet, you can decide on what's going to best serve the community. And you really, you're going to have large interest at stake. You're going to have the developers. They're going to be talking about money. I got to get this done. I'm losing money. It costs me so much a day. You've got the neighbors who say, if he puts that in, it's going to ruin my property value, one way or the other, raise it or lower it, it's going to change. But you're also looking at the interpretation of the plans, codes, and ordinances. Your staff is there to give you their best possible interpretation and write-up on the case based on your codes and ordinances. You may come at it differently. Because you drove by the site, you know that it's bad. Oh, you drove by it on your everyday trip. You didn't make a special trip. But you have this different perspective. I am the first professional planner to have ever been on the Dallas City Plan Commission, and I would disagree with staff. Now, the one thing I didn't do was I didn't blindside them. I let staff know if I disagreed with them. But I would disagree with them from my professional thing, but from my neighborhood stance, there were just reasons that I saw different things. The thing I would say to staff is, if I was sitting in your chair at your desk working on your computer, I'd probably written the same kind of taken report. But I got a different perspective on this. But it's just, staff they're supposed to be our friends. I would hate to think when I was staff. But also, you have to remember to use your comprehensive plan. It may be old, but it's still usable. Okay, the planning process is aimed at implementing that comprehensive plan and achieving your vision of your community. And there's, it's like we come back to perception. It's perception of what does the public see, what is the internal process that you've gone through. You've heard a lot about the processes from David. You also are going to look at being sure the notifications are there. People are working together. It is cogs in a wheel to try to work it all together. Sometimes it doesn't line up just right, but it's there. You want to be sure, and this applies mainly to smaller communities and smaller staff, that the information is available to all, that's available to the decision makers is also available to the public. And that constitutes the proper public notification. Did you talk about notification? Okay, notification is really important, and the laws in Texas now read that you have to publish your agendas where inside the building where they can be seen, not just out on a bulletin board, but they have to be. The idea is to post them as many places as you possibly can, and particularly moving more and more toward the Q codes and things like that for identifying what the issue is when a site actually has a sign on it that talks about sign. Proper notification means that everybody within 200 feet or whatever number of feet you decide you need to notify. It's usually in a newspaper, posted, like I said. It should be, now it's required to be on cities' websites. Your agenda is supposed to be there, and then the packet material as well. So the caution is what you put on social media. And I have a Facebook page, but I don't, as long as I was on a commission, I never posted to it. There are elected officials that feel like they sometimes have a little different version. That's their outreach. But as a planning commissioner, because you're making recommendations, or as a board of adjustment member, you're making decisions, I would just say stay off of social media. Your city may use Facebook to post their agendas, that's fine. But that opens up a place that I think you can post on Facebook without having comments. Open Meetings Act. Basically, there are no informal meetings on the Planning Commission, particularly the Board of Adjustment. They must be open. There's things online, particularly from the Attorney General and Secretary of State's offices that have rules for open meetings. I imagine you all had to listen at some point to two videos that had swampy violin music that told you how, I think we're supposed to listen to that every year. I think it's time for a new one. But it did give you good information, and it is available online to watch. So you want to strive to protect the natural environment, but you also want to protect the heritage of the built environment. Again, it's back to that balancing act, and that's what your decisions are based on. Because you're sometimes, oh, if we allow this, this is bad going to happen. So you look at that, you've got to deal a lot of times with rural development that keeps expanding into rural areas, or infill. Is it going to work? So again, back to your balancing act. But your comprehensive plan and some of your just plain common sense tells you kind of what you need to do with some of these. And if you aren't sure, you don't want to talk it over with another planning commission necessarily. You need to talk it over with staff. Now, you need to pay special attention that there's interrelatedness to these decisions of what you do with what's going to happen in the long range. They talked about zoning a piece of property out in the country for something big and fancy, and it's still vacant. You know, those are things that are just going to happen. But again, if your decision is based on your goals and policies and your comprehensive plan, you're on a lot better ground. But it has to interrelate. You can't just make a decision based on land use. You've got to look at transportation. You've got to look at, be told, basically, you're not going to go out and see if or go to the Public Works Department and see if there's adequate infrastructure. But you need to be sure that there's those are involved in your decision making. Now, the planning process looks at how you're going to achieve these standards. How are you going to behave as a planning commissioner or a board of adjustment member or whatever board other echelon? You need to understand what your role is. You need to understand that you're there to listen, and generally as a planning commissioner, make recommendations. You need to know what your relationships are, your relationship to staff, they're your friends, and your relationship to your fellow commissioners, they're your friends, but you don't talk to them a whole lot. And you don't correspond with them by email, unless it's for a party. You need to do your homework. Now that most of us get our packets by email or digitally or online, it used to be the worst noise anybody could hear at Planning Commission was this rip when the envelope first got open and you knew one of your fellow commissioners hadn't read. I'm about to start to say crap, but I'm not going to. But you hadn't read it because that's what they thought of it. But you know, really, the big part of being a commissioner or being a board of adjustment is to be able to ask questions. If you're not asking questions, you're not doing your job. Because if you don't understand it, then it's really good bet that somebody else doesn't understand it either. We had one thing developed way back. We had a nice bunch of people on Dallas Planning Commission, but some of them were community activists. They'd never been involved with any development or well, even the attorneys needed this a little bit too. But they weren't familiar with the planning terms. So we had one gentleman on our commission, and he would go, excuse me, may we please have an educational moment here? That gave us somebody, it could involve several people explaining, what does this mean? What do you want? What are you telling me? You're using jargon again. So tell me what you really mean. And I would sit across this table from a lady, and it wasn't Janie, because she sat next to me. But she'd get this glazed over look. And I would ask questions that I totally knew, and they'd look at me, why did you ask that question? Don't you know the answer? I would ask the question really for their benefit. Because there's always something that comes out that maybe is a light bulb moment for you when you ask that question. But if you don't ask the question, you're not doing the job. Yes, sir, ask your question.
Well, thank you. It's kind of a statement that might go along with what you're saying, because we have, of course, we have representatives of Fort Worth from every district. So there's 9 of us on our BOA. And we find ourselves with cases where we have board members that are familiar with the area because they live in the area, they work in the area. But we don't discourage them from their knowledge, but we do tend to utilize it though with each other, saying, well, I'm familiar, we start speaking, we say we're familiar with this area, I drive by this, and sometimes we utilize that information also to ask questions because of our knowledge, so that everybody has that knowledge at that point.
Including staff.
Pardon?
Including staff.
Well, of course, but we're not talking about making a special trip to the other side of the city, and I just happen to be driving by. No, we don't utilize that. But if we know it's in somebody's district and they're from that district and they're speaking about it, we're not going to certainly limit their expression and ability to ask questions based on their knowledge. Because then, at least when they're asking those questions, then everybody gets to hear the response and have that knowledge.
Right.
Does that sound fair?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, the thing is, too, back when I was a child and my mother drilled into me, and I'm sure a lot of you heard it, my mother was an educator, so that was funny. She said, the only dumb question is the one you didn't ask. If you don't ask that question, you're not doing your community a service, you're not doing your fellow commissioners a service. But on the other hand, you don't need to talk all the time and ask all the questions, because you really need to listen. And it's hard to listen, and you don't need to be listening like this. Really. And we still are tempted. Janie, caught ya. She's heard this before. She's heard it too many times. And the other thing is you need to vote your conscience. You don't need to vote how you think your neighbors want you to vote. You need to take into the consideration what they're talking about or what they told you. But you need to vote your conscience. The worst case I had was one that was at the end of, I was brand new on Planning Commission, and I can say it now, mean-spirited neighbors decided they wanted to get rid of a trailer park at the end of my street. Now, it wasn't a mobile home park, it wasn't a manufactured home park, it wasn't industrialized housing, it was a trailer park. And it was inhabited basically by people, it was affordable housing, maybe not the best, but it was aging hippies and young Hispanic families. Well, these people went and misused the crime stats, and the case came to Planning Commission that they could get a specific use permit to continue to operate the trailer park in the residential zoning district. 3/4 of it was in the floodplain. And it wasn't in good shape, and the city had filed a code compliance case against the trailer park. So I'm there with half my neighbors revving up the bulldozer, and half of them taking Christmas care packages and trying to help. So I thought, well, they got this opportunity to come into compliance with the code, and they got their, they did the opportunity. Why shouldn't they have the opportunity? So I voted to, I tried to get out of it. The opposition's attorney tried to get me thrown out. And I looked at the city attorney and I said, can I please get out of this? And she said, no. How far away do you live from this trailer park? 1,482 feet. Well, then know that. So the little attorney said, well, I own property. I own bajillions of dollars of property. Anyway, went. So I'm sitting there, and until the absolute last minute, when the city attorney said, oh, guess what? It's in your district. You get to make the motion. So so I moved to give them the opportunity to get this specific use permit. Oh, it was not a pretty picture after that. The villain in the whole process was the lady who lived down near Austin in some fancy schmancy community that never plowed any money back into the trailer park. And eventually the trailer park went away. That's 11 years ago, and the property is still vacant. So, and these people all had to be displaced, and the city had to help, and the council member got involved. It was mean-spirited. Granted, they needed a better place to live, but it wasn't necessarily the residents' fault. But I got lambasted in public by a lot of people, But then I would get these little emails saying, thank you for voting your conscience. But it was, you know, they wouldn't come out. They were almost anonymous emails, but you know, at least I got about 20 of them, so I kind of offset some of the lamebasting. But you do need to think about what you think is right from what you've been, the information you've been given, the discussion you've heard, not how your person sitting next to you is going to vote, but how you think is best for your community as a whole. How does it affect the local area, but how does it impact your community as a whole? So, what's your role as a planning commissioner? Did you talk about your role? I'm sorry, I missed the first part. Okay, your role as a planning commissioner, basically you're a legislative body, you're appointed by the legislative body, you're a group of citizens that they hope understand something that's going on. But you have both required and discretionary powers you make recommendations on zoning cases. You are a recommending body. The city council or city commission, whatever your final group is called, they're the ones that make the final decisions on that. But your deal is to keep in touch also with this comprehensive plan. And as a lot of communities go through new comprehensive plan development, the planning commission really needs to be in on it. When I've done about 30 comprehensive plans, and I like to use the planning commission as the main body of my advisory board, and then expand out from that with other involved citizens. But you need to keep in touch with that comprehensive plan. Like Dave said, if you're zoning things, if you're having a lot of variances and issues at Board of Adjustment or even at Planning Commission, then something's wrong with your zoning ordinance, and it may need to be updated to get rid of the drive-in and the taxidermy in the downtown. But you know, those are things. But your comprehensive plan, if your vision for your city's changed, if some of the goals just aren't applicable, you need to be looking at how that comprehensive plan may need to be redone or updated. You're making a lot of decisions you make are land use decisions, and they're based on what your existing land use map is, but they're based on what your future land use map is. You make recommendations on zoning changes. Sometimes the zoning change dies at Plan Commission if it's a negative recommendation, but sometimes it goes to City Council anyway, or people can appeal to City Council. However, a zoning decision that goes to the Board of Adjustment, and the decision of the Board of Adjustment is final. The next stop of a Board of Adjustment appeal is district court. And don't talk to anybody about it, because you might be a witness someday. You recommend, generally, you may recommend or you may approve subdivision plats. You may be in a situation of some cities that are really growing to make recommendations on annexation plans. But you're there also, even though I gave Janie a hard time about, Janie, I'm using you, a hard time about talking to people, you are there to be, to interface with the public, whether it's actually in the meeting, but you have to just, you're a sponge. You need to be listening and taking all the thoughts in that are coming to how you're doing. You're also there if you go to a public meeting or a neighborhood meeting, they're going to try to put you on the spot. And the thing is that you do, and it's kind of, you get your little written thing. I am here to listen. The meeting will be on such and such a day, please attend. You know, those are the things that you just have to be, but you're still there. They want to feel like they can. A lot of times they just totally forget us, particularly some applicants just totally forget us, and you generally have to send them home to talk to the community. So, but you need to be responsible in your role. You need to understand it. You need to understand if you don't have time to do it and you keep missing meetings, that maybe somebody else needs to be doing that job. You need to be sure that you understand the Open Meetings Act and just really the basic elements of planning. There are a number of books out there, your own city codes and ordinances that will help you along those as well. Basically, from a planner's perspective, reading some of this stuff is a good cure for insomnia. But, you know, you need to read it. But you need to be sure you understand the local resources that you have, what your charge is, or they call it charters now, or your charge as the commission is, what your code of ordinances are. But one of the main things you need to do is understand your rules of procedure for operating your meeting. Robert's Rules of Order now has a little yellow book called Robert's Rules of Order for Dummies. And, but there are other procedural ways to run meetings, and to be sure that your meeting is run according to procedure. You want to exercise fair and independent judgment. And I've already kind of touched on this. And you're going to make that decision, or to make the decision to make the recommendation based on the information you're provided, based on your individual experience, which could be your education or your drive by the site. But it's also going to be based on your what you hear at the meeting, and that's called doing your homework. So you need to do your homework. We think we finish school, we never get through doing homework, so.
Quick comment?
Yes, sir.
One of the things that we've started doing in Fort Worth too is we've been asking staff to provide us with some more education. So when they see something consistent that might be an issue across different boards and commissions, or something that affects us, then we spend maybe an extra half hour where they spend time educating us, and it seems to be working for us yet. Those of us that are here for Fort
Well,
Worth.
it's really important, if you've got a short agenda, for cities to throw in some sort of issue to explain, okay, do you all remember what this, whether you call it a special use or a specific use permit or a conditional use permit, why do we do this, and what should we be looking for in granting it?
And we spend some time looking at, for example, state hardships, really defining what a hardship truly is. And that helps take maybe a long agenda and make it a little bit shorter too. Because
If people understand, then, but it may get rid of some of the dumb questions. So, but you need to be really sure that you're seeing the big picture, understanding your city. I still subscribe to the Dallas Morning News for only one reason. I used to do it so I'd be sure my name wasn't in the paper. But it's necessary that you keep in touch with your community, understand. You got to see that big picture. You might not agree with the big picture always, but you've got to see what it is. And
We've got about 2 more minutes maybe to have time for question and answers.
you need to recognize conflict of interest and understand your obligations. If you have, you need to just publicly disclose if you have personal interest. That's conflict of interest we usually talk about. You're kind of going to define it very broadly as to whether you perceive you have a conflict of interest. It is not an excuse to get out of voting or participating, but you need to abstain from discussion of matter in which you might have conflict of interest. That means it's usually financial. We'll get into that. You need to be aware that you have a conflict of interest, and you need to abstain from participating in any sort of discussion, with your fellow commissioners, with your neighbors, and it applies mostly, it applies to Planning Commission just as much as to Board of Adjustment. And you need to, if you have that conflict of interest, you need to leave the chamber, leave the room, but don't leave the building, because you may have, it may be the last case, but you need to be there for the close. So you need to be out of the way. Now, you don't need to do what this nice surveyor did with me a few years ago in one of these meetings. He said, oh, I do plats in my little town. And I said, well, what do you do when one of your company's plats comes up? And he says, oh, I recuse myself. And I said, and where do you go? And he says, oh, I go and I sit on the front row. And I'm looking at him, and he's already making faces. And I'm saying, you are more intimidating and exerting undue influence sitting on the front row than if you stayed at your seat. Because not everybody can see you. Your other commissioners can't see you. He didn't like that at all. So you have a potential conflict of interest if you live in the notification area. If you are a close family member, as determined by your city, have an interest, either financial or live in the area. If you have oversight of a client's accounts, and remember also that perception is the game, And if Texas is a community property state, so you are your spouse. If your spouse has overview of the client that's involved in property. If you sit on another board or commission that's connected to the case, I had to recuse myself. One of the last cases I had to recuse myself because my church sold property to the next door neighbor and there was a plat. So I had to leave the room and couldn't discuss the plat. You need to recognize that you have a conflict. If you're not sure, you need to talk to the city attorney. You need to state at the meeting that you have that conflict. And the chair of your commission should state that you have the conflict and that you're leaving the room, and then state when you come back into the room. And there usually should be some sort of very simple form that has the case number and what it is. You just could say financial, and don't engage in any discussion. In general, they're due to business conflicts of owning property or owning so much. Again, it becomes perception because each city has a different amount of how much interest you can have. The big picture is you probably could never influence any big, large corporation that you own stock in, but there's still the perception of that you have an interest. And that gets convoluted sometimes. One case where we had a case at Dallas that was a year old, and it was an energy company, and it came back with the year-old memo, staff report. And so the man gets up in the middle, somebody starts speaking. Okay, it was XTO Energy, and then the guy gets up and starts talking about Exxon. And so we're sitting there, and we realized that we had conflicts of interest. We own some stock in Exxon. Not that we could influence any decision that they made. So 5 of us get up, go, oh, oops, we got a problem. 5 of us get up and leave and say, we've got conflict of interest, sorry. So we hit the newspaper. 5 planning commissioners walk out of planning commission. But it was, again, perception, whether you own the amount of money, and that's going to depend on what your city looks at. Its involvement in real estate or stock. So there's just that balance that you have to achieve there.
Now, excuse me, 5 sounds like a lot of people to have to walk out based on conflict of interest.
We have a quorum we have 15 members.
Right, but if you lose quorum because of a conflict of interest,
No,
since
it
that's
reduces
widespread.
the size.
Pardon?
Your quorum reduces as your people leave.
When
You don't
there's
lose
a
your quorum.
conflict of interest and you're reducing your, the size of remaining.
You still keep going. You don't lose.
Interesting.
How much do you take it down to 2? You got a problem.
Yeah,
But
because
it
you can't
depends on your
exactly go.
individual city. In Dallas, and most cities I've been exposed to, the quorum is then the body that is remaining there. Like we lost 5 of 15, there were still 10 people.
Right, but like Board of Adjustment Fort Worth, we have 9.
Oh, well, you've got a whole different thing with Board of Adjustment.
9. Well, I know. That's what I'm saying. We have 9 representatives, and one from each district. And if we lose 2, we have to have the 7 have a 7 vote. If we lose 3, we have no quorum. So if we have 2 or 3
That's
people,
how you all work it there.
Yeah,
Because I'm
okay.
used to
I
the
guess we gotta
5-member.
find out
Yeah.
what we do
So,
there.
well, we have a 15-member Board of Adjustment in Dallas, but it's divided into 3 5-member boards.
Isn't the financial interest, isn't there a percentage of your annual income or a percentage of your total assets?
It's going to depend on what your city's write-up, what your city is. It doesn't have your total income. It's how you're involved in, if you own a piece of property. He's going to help me again, thank you.
Chapter 171 specifies the specific criteria for state law. Most cities follow that state law, and it's 10% of your annual income or 10% ownership in stock of the company, or you have real property interest of more than $2,100.
Yeah, so I mean, I own some Exxon too, but, and
Yeah, but
I own some funds that own some Exxon also.
Yeah, the fund, I think when you turn your funds over and somebody else is managing your mutual fund, then that's not an issue. You're not, in most cases. In Dallas, we had a limit of how much, there was an amount of money. If you owned over $15,000 in interest,
Right.
then you had a conflict of interest. And
And
my
also
husband
X on
inherited
the
stock.
scale of that company, you know,
But the ones
relative
that-
to the business interest that it had at that public hearing.
So again, it's perception and it's caution. If you're uncomfortable with it, then you should recuse, but you've got to have a good reason to, because you're appointed there to conduct business. So you just need to balance it with your staff, talk to your staff and city attorney to be sure you're comfortable with it. I can't get down to your very specifics. I get kind of general on this and it may not apply to you specifically. So. All right, who's kin to you? Just about everybody that you know personally. But the interesting thing is there are two kinds of kin. There's consanguinity, which is your blood relatives, and affinity, which is marriage. And it goes to different places will have different levels of this consanguinity and affinity. Generally, this is the general thing. It's interesting, though, that affinity relationships, that's the marriage relationships, will continue for you after there's a divorce or death, if there's a living child in that marriage. So you got to keep up with your finances, guys. The sample form from the city of Dallas, it's a little long. We usually fill out about 2 lines of it. You shouldn't, again, back to what you shouldn't do, is to seek or accept gifts or favors. Again, that's perception. If you're seen being all chatty with an applicant at a meal or a golf tournament, it ended up with, I don't think anybody could buy my vote for a chicken salad sandwich or a cup of Starbucks, but it's that perception again that you're meeting outside of the realm of what you should be. It's complicated. If you've actually been an advocate for a project that's coming in a recent time, you need to be very careful. You may have a conflict of interest. If you were in a neighborhood association that opposed or wanted a change, you need to be careful there. That may be, again, a discussion with your city attorney. So you need to be sure that those are not there. You're not to use confidential information, disclose it. We don't really, when we get into open meetings, we don't have a whole lot of confidential information. Again, the rip and read, Commissioner, please read packets. And you need to listen to everybody. You need to respect the people that come before you. You need to respect your fellow commissioners. We even need to respect the applicant's representatives. But that's really what it is, because I think Dave went basically that we really are working together as a group, as a whole. We all have our individual opinions. We all come to it from different angles. But with staff, we need to, commissioners should expect a good report from staff. They should expect some training. They should, I keep hammering on this one that the report should be easy to read and jargon-free and not redundant. But you really need to identify those relationships between good planning and what the case is. And planners, staff will sometimes back away from really, I don't know whether I really, support this, sort of thing. I'm just writing it up. But all planners, no matter who they are, no matter if they're a staff or advocate, anybody that's involved in the planning process should be an advocate for good planning. Now, we all may look at what good planning differently, but we should be an advocate for good planning. Now, the staff expects commissioners to read the materials and ask questions, pretty much what we've done. Don't blindside your staff. Talk to them if you've got a question. And show respect for your staff. They're nice people too, but they're doing their job. You're there to do your job. With each other, we should expect our fellow commissioners to be prepared. If we're going to do it, I talked about educational moments earlier. The main thing that sometimes planning commissioners have problems with when we've got ones that really like to hear themselves talk is to stay on topic. And if someone, I think we've used in Dallas, what was we used the term? It was to stay on topic. I'll think of it later. I'll tell you. I'll stand in the middle of lunch and tell you. But we need to work together. Yeah. So we expect the applicants to, the applicants have an expectation too. And we need to be fair. They're citizens, they're the public, they're being paid to represent somebody who is the citizen and the public. So the applicant needs to be sure they get, they answer the questions that are asked. That was always a line with my son. Answer the question I asked you. You know, it may be required by your city to that the applicant should reach out and to present an honest representation of what they're doing. We want the applicants to stay professional, and above all, you want them to show up at the meeting. If they don't show up to answer questions, and they need to bring the appropriate people with them that can answer the questions. So if you have questions as commission or board, you should maybe let staff know, and then staff can let the applicant know that, gee, you might need to bring your engineer or your traffic engineer or that. But they need to be treated respectfully, the applicants, and in a timely manner, even though I always call them the suits. And the staff needs to be, the city council or city commission is going to expect staff to give you and them a recommendation based on the ordinances and procedures, and then the planning and zoning commission needs to make a solid recommendation based on the staff recommendation, public input, and consideration of implications. What are they? So that's what you should send forward. So when you're talking about zoning, you need to ask yourself, what's the applicant asking for? What's he really asking for? And what does it affect does it have on the site? What effect does it have around the site? And is it in accordance with comprehensive plan? Because I know when people would come to me and say, I want to do a PD and I want this area, and they're asking me for more height, more lot coverage, more lot coverage, more density, less landscaping and less parking. Tell me how this is going to work and how it's going to affect the surrounding area. So subdivision regulations, your big question is, if you have to ask any question, does it meet the requirements of subdivision regulation? Some cities have real sketchy subdivision regulations. Some are down to whether you put an exclamation point or a period at the end of the sentence, but you know. Basically, different cities have different practices, but what you should not play a part in the decision is basically, sometimes you need to know, like we needed to know with Exxon and XTO, but basically, the name of the applicant is not that critical. Sometimes it is, but basically, you can't really ask, unless you get, council can, the city council can, it's what's the financial capability? Can they really build this project? That's not your consideration. You want to know if they're going to provide the infrastructure and what's there. And in a lot of cases, unless you have architecture control, it doesn't matter to you what the structure looks like, because they're going to show you an oblique drawing that is really pretty and got a lot of trees and is a nice color if you like the color, and that isn't necessarily how the project's going to turn out. So what you're really looking at, what your ordinance says you should look at, you should be looking at how it affects the community, what it is it meeting your requirements? So, okay, you ready? I can wrap up here. There's just a couple of questions. Okay, if you're all together in party, is that okay? If you're all together, there's a quorum, all 9 of you or 7 of you are there.
Right? No, I'm listening.
You can be at a party. Just don't talk about cases. Just don't talk about anything that relates to your deal. You can go to the city picnic. You can go to a party at someone's house. But you don't talk about cases at that party.
We pretty much wait to talk about cases until we're in City Hall.
Yeah, that's right. City Hall. The cases should be discussed inside.
I do have something that you mentioned, though. It was interesting because I don't know if this is the way that Dallas is set up, but I'm trying to imagine a situation where a zoning commission case might come to a board of adjustment.
A lot of them will.
Really? We haven't seen one. I don't know. Have you guys seen one come to BOA?
Yeah.
In Fort Worth at least? No, not yet. So, what kind of circumstances would have to happen for that to occur?
There are a number of ways that they could do. I can think of one. Well, one I had was it was a zoning case essentially, but but it came through the building permitting, and I used to work in Sugar Land, and they had a large lot subdivision, and the neighbors were driving by, and they realized that there were 3 houses being built on this single-family residential lot. 3 separate houses, 3 separate kitchens, and so they went and questioned the zoning and the building official, and they were told they had to basically tear down 2 of the houses, or do something, because it was single family and they were actually building 3 separate houses. So it did go to the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment found that it was an illegal zoning. The building official should have never admitted, he should have checked better with the zonings. They eventually did go to district court from the Board of Adjustment because the applicant didn't like it. Eventually they came back and they connected the houses by walkways and took the kitchens out of the two of the houses. It was a 3-generational family that was trying to do it in an area that didn't allow it.
Because I can see where somebody can go to the zoning commission, get something rezoned for a specific type of development, and then once they want to start establishing what their development's going to actually be, then they might come to the Board of Adjustment for those specifics as far as variances and special exceptions.
Well, state statutes say what the Board of Adjustment's rules, basically what you're to look at.
Right.
Whether it's a variance or a special exception or appealing a decision of
From
another
another-
board or staff.
Yeah,
So those
which
are
happens.
things that can be
'Cause we-
done. But sometimes you get other stuff added, cities add other stuff to
Right,
what
because
they
like,
want.
of course, historical preservation, we had an issue there, so we reviewed it and pushed it back to them, based on certain conditions. But we haven't had a zoning commission case come to us
You had a
yet,
zoning
so.
commission case come back to the Board of Adjustment?
Case.
The case
That's
does,
what I
the
thought.
applicant
The case
does. The applicant may appeal the decision made
Yeah.
by the case specific
I'm
does
just
it.
curious, like,
But usually what's happened is it's gonna get thrown back, or
Alright.
if it goes to the judge, it'll get thrown back to, let's start this case over again. So-
all right, just want to know what to
But not
expect.
to, I don't think you're the judge on how the planning commission and council acted, but I've seen it mainly through staffs turn something down, and they go to the Board of Adjustment saying this is a variance, and I wanna pursue that.
Most of our communities, we'll see it go to the city council anyway, so.
Yeah.
And I'm going to jump in here, I'm sorry.